Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Majlis today. And it's my greatest joy to present you Dženita. And I won't introduce Dženita because it was not my wonderful idea to invite her, but it was that of our brilliant colleague, Michael Noble, who is with us. And so it will be Michael who will introduce Dženita. Most of you know Michael. He has been helping us in this series for over a year, and he has been a wonderful addition to our community, and he's indeed a gem of the institute. So and I like to thank him for inviting Dženita and for everything what he does for our community. And Michael, please, could you continue?
Thanks, Istvan. I'm delighted to be introducing Dženita to the Majlis. I first got to know Dženita at the Arabic philosophical reading class at the Warburg Institute, where I was doing my PhD. This was back in 2016 or 15. Dženita, please kind of correct
me. 16.
16, yeah. And Dženita was doing her PhD at SOAS, which is at the building kind of next door to the Warburg Institute. We were reading, I can't remember now, kind of texts from the kind of period of the Greco-Arabic transmission all the way up until kind of Fakhruddin Razi, Suhrawardi, Ibn Sina, things like that. So Dženita has a very kind of wide range of intellectual interests. But her specialism is in an area, a geographical area and a time period about which I'm woefully ignorant. I mean, she knows about my stuff, but I don't really know about her stuff. So I'm very happy to be bringing her on to talk to us this evening. Her book is recently published, and she is an assistant professor at University of Amsterdam, Islamic Studies. She has a particular interest in notions of piety and devotion, and she will be speaking to you a lot more about that in the context of speaking about her book about the Bosnian Hajj accounts. And Dženita, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Istvan, for this really kind invitation, and thank you so much, Sarah, for organizing everything. So basically, I will share my PowerPoint here. And I can see now that I haven't put my the cover of my book on the slide, which is like such a shame. I should definitely do that. So in can you all see the? Yeah. So basically, Bosnian Hajj Literature is a book which talks about perhaps quite a niche topic for those who are not really familiar with the Balkans or with the Bosnian history. But as someone called it recently, this book, Bosnian Hajj Literature, Multiple Paths to the Holy, is actually a short spiritual history of Bosnians or Bosnian Muslims or Bosniaks, as basically I'm using both Bosnian Muslim and Bosniak in order to respect the self-determination of Muslims who live in Bosnia. In my book, I cover the Hajj discourses written from the 16th to the 21st centuries in a range of different media. So I cover things written in the Fadail form, or the form which is basically a genre which depicts cities, regions, so classical Arabic forms, to all the way up to the blogs, internet material, something which can be found like on Facebook, on Instagram, in the 21st centuries. So there's like a huge range of different material which I cover in this book, spanning several centuries, but also spanning material written in Arabic, in Ottoman Turkish, and in Bosnian. I mostly include textual material, so I include things written in both poetry and prose, but I also slightly tackle the visual material. So how did Hajj leave a trace in the way of, like, for example, drawings, or like Dalail al-Khairat, or even sometimes on the walls of the buildings in Bosnia. So I have a very, very narrow geographical focus. So I'm focusing on what Bosniaks have written about Hajj, both as a ritual and as a journey, what they wrote about the holy places in this long span of time. But my temporal span, the temporal span of this book is quite wide. So there are different genres, different time periods, like so from the 16th century to all the way up to the 21st centuries. So how did this book come into being? So that's, I guess, a very, very long question. And I should probably go back to 2010 to start answering this question. So prior to my PhD, I did my MA in modern Arabic literature, and more concretely, I focused on the post-colonial Palestinian novel. So my MA journey started basically by me taking a class in post-colonial literature and reading things from Bucci and Mecheta all the way up to Salman Rushdie. So like the literature we read in this course was really very, very diverse. So I decided to work on, or to focus on, the post-colonial Palestinian novel. And obviously I won't deal with the problematic of the word post-colonial in the Palestinian sense. Is the post-colonial really post, or is it really past or not? So basically that period of my academic career and education has taught me one thing, which is that literature can and does reflect social and political concerns, and on the other hand, also that people can use literature, they can use writing in order to send a message, reflect certain conditions in which they live. So after finishing my MA, I started thinking about something which would, in a way, bridge this, which would bridge the two research interests which I had, one of which was the interest in the Bosnian literature. The other one was obviously the interest in the Arabic literature. So I was thinking about connections which could bind them, and one of the things which kind of came up was the question of the mobility. So how things circulate, how ideas circulate. And this is when I started thinking about the Hajj, because if we kind of erase all other connections between the Bosnian region and the Middle East, there is obviously one connection which still stays on, which is the connection of the devotion, the connection of the religious devotion of Bosnian Muslims to Hajj, which didn't really cease, even despite all the numerous challenges which happened throughout the history. So this is when I started thinking about this mobility of Hajj and how it reflected in the Bosnian literature. And basically, I didn't want to focus only on the Hajj. I also wanted to focus on different spiritual geographies which appeared in these various writings about the Hajj. Another thing which got me thinking about this topic, which I ended up with, was the absolute predominance of Hajj motifs, Hajj symbols, Hajj imagery, Hajj imaginary in the Bosnian, basically in Bosnia, like all over, everywhere. So if you, for example, think of, let's say, paintings of Mecca and Medina, those ones which can be kind of bought for a very small amount of money anywhere. So they're ubiquitous in most Bosnian Muslim houses. So the images of Mecca and Medina, the photographs of people who would like bring them from Mecca and Medina, objects which people would bring as gifts. So, for example, prayer mats brought from Mecca and Medina, or the items of makeup, like the eyeliner or kohl. So all of these things, in a way, testified to the presence of Hajj in the lives of Bosnian Muslims, even those who would never be able to go on a Hajj. So then I started looking into this like conglomerate of different objects, but also texts which were present in Bosnian Muslim lives. I started looking into travelogues, mostly into travelogues, those ones which were translated, but also those which are written in Arabic and in Ottoman Turkish and still are in that form. So I kind of started thinking about like what effect do these writings have on Bosnian Muslim lives, and how is this Hajj imagery and Hajj symbolism basically used not only to convey the devotion to Mecca and Medina, but also to convey certain socio-political and religious tensions existing in Bosnian society itself. So in some ways, looking into these materials had this like double purpose. On the one hand, to indeed emphasize the connection, the religious, devotional, spiritual connection of Bosnian Muslims to Mecca and Medina. But on the other hand, the way in which this imagery has been used to convey something else. So there were double layers in this. So for example, here, what you can see on this slide is the top picture depicts Manasikul Hajj, like a very common very common ritual manual, translated into Bosnian, something which could be found in Bosnian libraries, in Bosnian houses, even throughout some very difficult periods in Bosnian history. On the lower photo, you can see something which resembles like a tombstone, but this is actually a Hajj stone. So what is written here is the names of two Hajis who were a husband and wife, who went, so you can see here that this stone has like 4 dates, basically. The first one depicting the year when the person was born, and the second year depicting or presenting the year not of a person's death, but a year in which the person has actually performed the Hajj. So these types of stones were usually set close to public roads. So in some ways affecting not only people who are religious or do want to go on a Hajj, but also anyone, like literally anyone who would pass by this road would be kind of aware that there were some people who went on a Hajj in 1987, for example. So this tradition of erecting these types of stones is still alive in some parts of Bosnia. And these objects obviously also evoke rituals, such as, for example, people would stand on the stone when they would saying their farewell speech before going on a pilgrimage. So basically, like all of this has in a way affected the way I tried to formulate and shape my book, but this was obviously not a very easy process. I started as a literary studies person, so my MA was in literature, and then obviously when I switched to the research of the Bosnian Hajj literature, I realized that the common approaches in the literary studies will not really fit me. Basically, the major question was the question of how do we analyze literature, and how do we decide what is worthy of being studied and what is not being worthy of being studied. So to kind of simplify that, when I started looking into the material, I realized that I first started looking obviously for pilgrimages, so for the travelogues. So I wanted to see travelogues in the shape of Ibn Battuta or in the shape of Awliya Chalabi. I expected that kind of form to be present also in the Bosnian Hajj literature. However, what I encountered was not that straightforward. The type of the travelogues which I found was quite varied in its structure and content. And it was quite, and I kind of faced many challenges in the very presumption of what constitutes a good travelogue. So how I ended up what I ended up doing was expanding the focus and including anything, like literally anything which is written about Hajj in any type of form and shape, in any type of like structural form, whether it's poetry or prose, whether it's a diary, whether it was written by someone who is like a very established author or someone who is basically writing something for the first time in their life. So I kind of abolished the category of an author in that way in order to save what is beneath, which is the very Hajj discourse, which I wanted to see how it works and how it functions in the Bosnian society as a whole. So in many ways, I wanted to look into the collective views on the pilgrimage rather than pursuing just like the literary studies approach of focusing on one author and looking into the stylistic features and so on. So that meant that I had to extend the way I position my own research, which led me to position it in regards to first the Ottoman studies, because I worked on Arabic, I worked on the Ottoman Turkish. Later on, however, because the research extended into the 20th and 21st centuries, I started thinking about it more in terms of the framework of Islamic studies. And for a very long time, and I still do think it's like a nice and fitting field for the research I've done and the research which I hope to do in future as well. Because it focuses on what is actually like the common joint thread of all of these writings, which is the Islamic devotion to Hajj, to Mecca and Medina. However, while writing this book, I've realized that I also had to, in a way, look for different types of theoretical frameworks as well. Some of which were not readily provided by the things I was reading. So I finally ended up using Birgit Meyer's theory of mediation, which in my very simplified way means that literature such as the Hajj literature and, for example, also visual materials on the Hajj objects and so on, they're channels of mediation. So they mediate between different realms of human imaginary, or they mediate between different realms of human activity. So this is how I also looked into the Hajj literature as a mediating channel for several things. So when people write about the Hajj, whether they're writing in the 16th century or whether they're writing in the 20th or 21st centuries, they're mediating many different things. They're mediating their devotion to God. They're trying to convey their own religious experience. In many cases, they're trying to prolong this experience which they had during the Hajj. They're also doing a mediation, they're performing mediation in relation to the communities in which they're living. And this is, for example, reflected in the fact that many of the people I read and analyzed, whose work I analyzed, they try to mediate this experience to people who are unable to perform the Hajj, who are unable to go there, or people who might go there in future. And especially in the 20th century, they're mediating this experience to audiences which are not even Muslim. So that also has to be taken into account. Like when people write, they're not only writing for themselves, they're also writing for multiple audiences which they keep in mind. They're also mediating history and future in a way that by using the religious stories, they're mediating or they're trying to find a certain type of symbolism which they then apply to their own lives. And obviously, there is a very simple level of mediating socio-political circumstances of one's time and trying to kind of relate those socio-political circumstances of one's time to the perceived eternal experience of the Hajj. So all of these different levels of mediation, I tried to deal with them. I tried to uncover them, and I tried to obviously present them. What is interesting in looking into the Hajj literature in this way is also the fact that despite the diversity of these different forms in which people wrote about their Hajj experiences, there's also sometimes something which binds it together, which is again a term I take from Birgit Meyer, which is the sensational forms. The sensational forms would simply here imply the repetition of certain religious phrases or religious symbols, which would appear in writings from the 16th to all the way up to the 21st centuries, which also in a way helps us to understand how a certain type of a devotion can be cultivated through such a long time. It's basically by keeping certain forms intact, by holding on to a certain types of imagery, whether preserved in types of hadith, and then kind of building upon that with things, with descriptions, with impressions, which are more bound to the particular time period in which a person was writing about. So when talking about the historical background, because I obviously had to deal a lot with the history, and this is again something which I inherited from my MA studies, the fact that whatever we do, whatever we work on, or whatever we even say, like the knowledge we produce is always situated. It's like always placed in a really obvious and very particular historical background. So a large part of my book is dedicated to this. So I'm looking into the events on a larger scale, on a more global scale, but also on a more local scale, the events and processes which led to particular Hajj imagery at particular times. So obviously the first and very obvious one would be the framework of the spread of Islam or Islamization and the incorporation of Bosnia into the Ottoman Empire. So how do these Hajj discourses even start in a region such as Bosnia? So I tried to trace down the origins of the first Hajj discourses written by Bosnian Muslims. And I tried to see like what type of form they take, also what type of ideas do they convey, what type of descriptions do they convey. And I also tried to look into very specific local particularities, like whether there is something essentially Bosnian about these writings. So this is a question which I pursued throughout the book, from the first to the fifth chapter, but I have to say that it was the hardest thing to think of, and the hardest thing to, in a way, try to prove in the first chapter, when the literature which I worked on was simply in Arabic. It was simply written in classical Arabic forms. It referred to this vast amount of religious knowledge created in other places, but all of this was written by a Bosnian person, or was compiled by a Bosnian person. So it was really hard to in a way trace down what is particularly Bosnian about these particular writings. Some other historical issues which I tackled or tried to tackle in the book are obviously the questions of the empires. So Bosnia was under the Ottoman Empire until the late 19th century, but then it was occupied by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then it obviously brought different types of challenges, different types of reflections which were present in the Hajj literature. Also, different state models in which Bosnia was operating all the way up to the independence of the country. Then obviously the wars, in which wars could obviously prevent people from going to Hajj, but they could also, in a very interesting way, strike up a very different imaginary related to the Hajj, especially in the framework of sacrifice and the way Hajj is kind of likened to a sacrifice when it's performed by people who are wounded in wars and so on. There's obviously the question of diseases, which are ubiquitous throughout the history of the Bosnian Hajj literature, the effect of diseases which it had on description of a person's pilgrimage. And finally, also, I mean, this is not the only element which there is, but I think it should be mentioned here. It is the factor of modernization. And modernization, I here take to be an overall rehaul or transformation of the modes of writing and the modes of going on a pilgrimage. So the change which happens quite radically from the 19th century onwards is that people are no longer traveling in the same way as they did before the 19th century. And this obviously leads to certain types of omissions, but also additions in the way they write about the Hajj. There is also the modernization in the sense of the rise of the local language as a medium of writing. So the slow and gradual but definite decrease of Arabic and Ottoman Turkish affected also the way people wrote, like the genres in which people wrote. And then obviously with the 19th century, with the 20th centuries, we have the rise of people writing in local languages, which also means that they write in bigger numbers, and that we have also the introduction of new, I would say, actors in the process of writing about the Hajj. And here I especially would like to emphasize the role of women in creating particular discourses on Hajj. Something which is quite interesting, like how this democratization of the Hajj journey also leads to the democratization of writing about something as intimate, as personal as it is the performance of the pilgrimage. So all of these elements are embedded in the analysis of the book, but again, I would kind of here like to emphasize that the book cannot be reduced only to a very simple analysis of the socio-cultural elements or the socio-cultural contexts and then their application to the Hajj. Obviously, writing about Hajj is something more enduring than just reflecting on the conditions in which a person went on a Hajj. So in a very brief overview, this is the list of the authors I mostly dealt with in the 5 chapters. And as you can see here in the first chapter, The Meanings of the Sacred, I'm talking about the 3 authors who have, all of them have this Nisba al-Busnawi, indicating that they were indeed from Bosnia. However, the genres in which they were writing, the forms which they took were, they could belong anywhere. Like you could read them you could find works on Hajj in this form, in this format, anywhere across the regions of the Ottoman Empire. So I was trying really hard to find what is distinctly Bosnian here. And I wouldn't say that I was too successful, but that in itself is also a certain type of a result, because it shows how the first generations of Bosnians who were writing about the Hajj were firmly embedded in the structures of the Ottoman Empire, and thus also embedded in the structures of the Islamic tradition, or writing about the Hajj in Islamic tradition. These writings are not travelogues. They're writing about Mecca and Medina in a very Sufi framework, using Sufi terminology, Sufi imaginary. They are writing in a way to inspire other people to go on a Hajj, but also to ponder on the symbolic meanings of the Hajj. So this part is talking about the symbolic meanings of the Hajj. The second chapter, The Roads to Mecca, goes more firmly into what the Bosnians who actually lived in Bosnia, how they reflected on their Hajj journey, and how they, what type of imageries did they put in their writings. So this chapter talks about two authors who wrote. One of them wrote in the form of poetry in verse. The other wrote in prose. But what's interesting is that both of them wrote in Ottoman Turkish, still indicating this mid-level. So they didn't write in Arabic. It was not meant for scholarly audiences completely, but they also didn't write in a local language. The third chapter talks about change, what happens with this when modernization kicks in, when people start writing about the Hajj in multitudes of different forms, when they start reflecting on not only on Hajj, but also on the state in which the Islamic world is in, and the state in which the Hajj becomes, in a way, an object to be judged and analyzed, not only by Muslims, but also by non-Muslims. And it's at the same time a challenge and a threat. So I'm showing how Bosnian authors are dealing with this, both challenge and a threat to the what they call the essence of Hajj. So we can basically talk in this period about the reification of the Hajj, how Hajj becomes not only something which is felt and experienced, but it becomes almost like this idea which exists among other ideas, like Islam is somewhere, existing somewhere as an abstract idea, and Islam consists of something which is firmly defined as the Hajj, and then they're trying to find the meaning of this idea of the Hajj. It's quite a modern and modernist, I would say, idea, which has influenced the generations of Hajjis to come, including those I'm talking about in the fourth and the fifth chapter. So what modernity has kind of brought in is the way Hajj is being conceived. In previous periods, the Hajj is being conceived as an obligation, as a duty, something which is incumbent on every capable, able Muslim man or woman. However, the way the authors in these earlier periods described the Hajj was more of an experience which is kind of compatible with other experiences, such as going on a ziyarah or something similar. However, with the modern changes, what happens is that the Hajj is being placed in this abstract form. It has to compete against other ideas, such as, for example, capitalism. So they suddenly talk about the Hajj as an anti-capitalist endeavor. So the idea of the Hajj becomes more important than the actual physical performance of the Hajj. So this is something which kind of goes through the fourth and the fifth chapter as well. The fourth chapter talks about disconnections. I'm here focusing mostly on the feeling of whether the Hajj is a binding tool, something which joins, connects all Muslims together, or whether it's something which, in a way, does not actually bring all the Muslims together. So there is a lot of talk about Muslim unity as reflected in the Hajj. And what is also interesting is that the topic of Palestine comes up here quite a lot. It tells you something about these continuities, sometimes really unfortunate continuities which happen by discussing, the attitudes of Muslims towards Palestine. And in the 5th chapter, I'm focusing more on what happens with during the Serbian aggression on Bosnia, and what happens with the authors who are writing in this period. How are they perceiving Hajj in these really difficult and tragic conditions? And also I'm looking into the comeback of the body and the bodily experience of the Hajj, precisely in this regard. So the last chapter, in a way, ends with observing all of these different discourses kind of colliding together and shaping around the event of the aggression and the Bosnian Muslim spiritual response to it. So where to next? Basically, when talking about the Hajj, it's like a never-ending topic. So my book is out, but my mental project is not finished, obviously. So here you can see the front page of the bi-weekly religious newspaper Preporod, which here depicts we can see the image of the harem, and there are not too many pilgrims in front. What this actually depicts is the Hajj, the performance of the Hajj during the pandemics. And obviously what we can see here is that the conditions in which the Hajjis go on Hajj are still influencing the way in which the Hajj is depicted. And this is something which I kind of expect to evolve, obviously, in the future as well. What I expect and what I would like to work on in the next 5 years also, at least I would try to, is how the Hajj is going to be connected to the climate crisis. So how the Hajj writings are going to reflect on the ecological crisis, especially the crisis which is tied to the fuel and the basically where are the human responsibilities in going on a pilgrimage in this time of the climate crisis. I also expect, obviously, the Hajj to be tied again to the political circumstances in which we are all living. And it would be interesting to see how Hajj is going to be depicted in the context of the ongoing genocide in Gaza.
Thank you, Dženita, for a wonderful talk. Just before I open up the floor to questions, I've got a couple myself. Earlier on, you were speaking about, when you were speaking about the theoretical kind of framework, the theory of mediation, you were speaking about Hajj accounts that were written, well, some of them being written as a way of mediating the non-Muslim community in Bosnia. Could you kind of expand on that a little more? Because I found that really interesting. Yeah, the ways in which that was done, like who was the target audience and for what purpose, etc.
So basically what happens is that we have this rise of journalism by the end of the 19th century. And there are numerous different journals being published in the region, so written in Bosnian, written in Croatian, in Serbian. So what happens is that, and obviously we at the same time have this rise of people going on a Hajj, coming back from the Hajj and so on. So the Hajj in a way becomes an object of fascination, but also condemnation by many non-Muslim authors who are also sharing this public sphere with Muslims. So the Hajj is in a way being criticized or described in very pejorative terms by many non-Muslim authors. And like these books come out, articles come out, and there is almost like this patronizing tone from the non-Muslim authors towards the Muslim authors, indicating that the Hajj is the journey which does not like really comply to the Hajjianic standards of the age. So we're talking about this like age of cholera, and then later on also. So the whole blame kind of gets put on the returning pilgrims. And this is like a topic which goes on and on throughout the 20th century, that pilgrims are kind of, it's basically a combination of different discourses. Some of them are rationalist discourses, like, oh, why do these people have to go on a Hajj, like, or somewhere where what are they doing there? Like, it's just like useless. So this like rationalist, very modernist discourse is in a way it affects this public sphere. It affects also the Muslim intellectuals as well. They're all reading, sharing the same space. So in a way, they feel the need to defend Hajj, and by implication also to defend Islam. So what happens in this period is that not only that the Bosnian Muslim authors are in a way defending Hajj, but they're also in a way internalizing these rationalist critiques of the Hajj in such a way that they have to that they feel that they have to defend the Hajj in a way which would diminish its devotional, its bodily role, but kind of emphasize, on the other hand, more the rational role of the Hajj. So all the Muslims have to go on a Hajj because it's the meeting of the Muslims, and they can solve political and social problems of the world, and so on and so forth. So basically the influence of different audiences, non-Muslim audiences and Muslim audiences, kind of collide in this period to create the idea that Hajj has to be very rational. It has to be a ritual which is rational. So its irrationality is being cast out. Like they really don't want to talk about the devotional aspects of the Hajj, the emotional aspects of the Hajj. So if they describe that, they always say like, well, obviously we know that people feel very emotional when they go on a Hajj, but that is not the purpose of the Hajj. The purpose of the Hajj is to unify people so that all the Muslims can have some economic, political, whatever gain. So it's literally like this kind of enmeshing of different discourses. On the one side, the accusatory discourse of the non-Muslim authors, and on the other side, there is like this apologetic discourse of many Muslim authors. Something which changes in a dramatic form only after the aggression. So only like after the last war. I mean, there are hints of descriptions which do emphasize the emotional one, but they're not really in a majority. So throughout the 20th century, it was all about defending the idea and the essence of the Hajj. So yeah.
And are those critiques, the non-Muslim critiques, are they laced with the idea that the Hajj itself somehow smuggles in unwelcome otherness into?
Oh, totally. It's like, I mean, there is obviously the underlying, I would say, like in the common, I would use this common term of Islamophobia. Like there's definitely the underlying Islamophobia beneath all of this. And it's just, it's like this overall depiction of the Hajj, and by extension, the Muslims as the other. So they are the other because they have these like really strange rituals. And then, it kind of goes on to say that Islam is basically, I mean, it's like the relationship between Islam and the Hajj in this sense is like, it's a very metonymical relation. It's like the Hajj stands there for Islam. So whenever they are critiquing Hajj or any of the other rituals, they're actually critiquing Islam and like by extension, the Muslims. So it's like a very, very tight connection between these different like ways of argumentation.
Yeah, another question. I mean, the kind of later on you mentioned the kind of increasing engagement in the 20th century with issues to do with Palestine and the Palestine question. Can you trace how that emerges in the discourse and how that relates to the Hajj? And yeah, expand more on that and the possible affinities that Bosnians may feel with the Palestinian condition.
Yeah, I was also quite surprised when like analyzing this particular issue. So the question of Palestine in the Hajj discourse comes up after the Second World War, and obviously with the establishment of Israel. And what comes to the front there, and which is quite interesting, is that the first time Palestine is mentioned in this context is in the travelogues, which were actually published under the keen eye of the state, I would say. So they were censored. Not everyone could publish about the Hajj. So it appears in these travelogues, which were published in 1949 and 1954. And Palestine is basically described as a very sad cause, something where the Muslim world has failed at. However, at the same time, Palestine is almost like a mirror image of Bosnia in some ways. And in this context, in this particular context, it's shown as Bosnian Muslims are like the success case, and Palestinians, they didn't fight for their own. They're depicted as not having fought for their own freedom, which is where they're depicted in quite a negative way. So you can see that this balance happening in some of the first travelogues after the Second World War. However, with time, Palestine kind of becomes this like rallying cause in the 1960s, in 1970s. It becomes something which the authors use to show how the hypocrisy of the world, the hypocrisy of the Muslim world in a way. So Palestine is used as this element which brings to the disconnections between different like members of the Muslim world. So in that way, you can see that the ideal of the Muslim unity is never questioned. Like, so it kind of exists as an idea. It exists as a reified thing. Its validity is never questioned. It's just shown always as something which is not in the right state. So Muslims go on a Hajj and they keep going on a Hajj, but this like ideal has not been reached. Why? Because they failed on Palestine. So on the question on the issue of Palestine. So this is the idea which becomes really prominent in the 1960s and 1970s. That becomes like really important to kind of emphasize whenever we're talking about Muslim unity. We're talking also about Palestine and how this Muslim unity cannot be achieved because Muslims are not helping Palestinians. So there is like always this connection. Later on, obviously after the aggression, Bosnians do see themselves in two ways. Like there are two sets of images, basically. One is like Bosnians as Palestinians. And also there is another set of images, which is Bosnia as Andalusia. So like they're like basically two operating frameworks in a way, which do appear again a lot when talking about like Muslim unity and Hajj.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dženita. I should open up the I'll open up to questions from the floor. If
just before that, Michael, because then we will close the recording. Dženita, could you please talk about, if you want to, about your own journey and any challenges and any advice you have, because it's not. I mean, you are Bosnian. You, if I understand, you did most of your studies in England, or I don't know when you came to England. Then you pursued a career here, or I mean, not here, in the Netherlands. And you studied, well, your original studies in the SOAS were focused on Palestinian novel, and then you engaged into a project which is a multidisciplinary project, and it's an unusual one in the sense that it's not necessarily something within Islamic studies or Arabic studies that would immediately help you to get a job. Obviously, this happened to be wrong, and I'm very happy with this. But you certainly, I guess, you considered this, or you just went with your heart and with your interest. And how, well, which were you mentioned the difficulties and challenges of tackling a topic which was very different from what you studied before. But yes, so yeah, again, challenges, advices, solutions, what you have to share.
So basically, oh my God, there's so much to be said. So I did my BA and my MA in Bosnia. So I would say that some of the first challenges, which now, like reflecting back on that part of my journey, I would say the first challenge one of the first challenges I had, it was basically the question of like sources, and the question of like finding literature, finding books, finding like staying in like, you obviously want to learn, like you want to kind of read things, and then there are many institutional obstacles towards that. However, I would say that maybe the bigger challenge now, when like reflecting on all of that, would be perhaps the way Western academia treats local scholars, or scholars who come from places which are not deemed as, you know, central, or like places and centers and nodes which are not deemed to be the centers of the production of knowledge in the Western kind of sense of the word. And that is kind of obvious in so many. It's obvious in the way like publishers prioritize things. It's obvious in the ways people's own interests are appreciated according to, you know, their origins or where they come from. So, for example, I could write a book on Bosnia, and someone who comes from like US academia could write a book on Bosnia as well. And obviously we can see, we can kind of measure like which books gets, you know, more attention, or in a way, like who gets to have the final say in stating certain things, certain claims about the world in which we're living in. So I think this kind of this balance is something which we definitely need to work on, whether in terms of like this very popular phrase, decoloniality, which I'm not fully on board with if it's used by, again, like if it's appropriated by the Western academia, I'm kind of not very comfortable with that. So I would say those are the challenges. That's like maybe the challenge, which is perhaps harder than any other challenge, any other like material challenge one can face coming from the Balkans. It's just like this disbalance in the way knowledge is perceived, like the production of knowledge is perceived. When it comes to some like more concrete things which were challenging, but I also find them very, I think they kind of built me as a scholar. I would say that learning languages, or being willing to kind of learn languages very quickly, was something which I just had to kind of accept, and I had to accept it as a reality. And I would suggest that to any MA student who wants to pursue an academic career, is that languages is like, I would say, like one of the most important things. So one of the shifts which happened when I was like after my MA, so I studied Arabic and I did my MA in Arabic literature, but then I wanted to do this other thing, and then I realized I don't have Ottoman Turkish. Like I don't know Ottoman Turkish, and to know Ottoman Turkish, obviously I had to learn Turkish. So all of that took a couple of years for me to just like, you know, start reading documents and start understanding what they're saying. So you have to kind of be very, very patient with yourself and obviously with your learning process in that regard. Another thing which I found challenging, but also very, very rewarding, is dealing with different types of archives, libraries, institutions in general. So sometimes it can be very, very frustrating dealing with institutions which, in any country, like whether Bosnia, Turkey, UK, whatever, the institutions can be very gatekeeping at sometimes. They can like really withhold information. Sometimes you don't get the information you need and someone else gets it, like just like with coming from a different context. So navigating the institutions, archival manuscript libraries, that was definitely something to which helped me like in my learning process, but it was also very frustrating at times. What I would kind of suggest, again, if there are any MA students in the audience, is to, it's kind of related to this interdisciplinarity, which I ended up in, is that if you have a topic you're really passionate about, I think you should try to see where it fits in as many fields as you can. So if you see conferences on, I don't know, you're working in the field of Ottoman studies, but you see a conference which is in more generally in Islamic studies, you should apply to this conference. You should kind of meet your peers and other academics who are maybe discussing certain topics which can give you like a more rounded view on your own topic. So I would say, like, I really tried to reach out to as many fields as I could to, in a way, situate myself in relation to these different fields, in order to kind of find out more about my own research. So I would say that is definitely something which I found challenging. You know, sometimes you get rejected from a conference call, like you don't get in, and it can be quite frustrating, especially if you're really, really young, if you're very ambitious, and if you really want to say your ideas somewhere. But I would say still, like, pursue this and try to learn as much as you can from different fields. Like, read widely, read like whatever you can, what you can kind of get a hold of. Read something which is not even directly connected to your topic. So in short, just, you know, your research matters. So other people should also know about that.
Thank you. That's wonderful, Dženita. Thank you very much indeed. The first thing you said about writing about Bosnia with your name and with the specific characters in your name, giving you less credit. That's interesting, and it I was thinking that maybe there is a link here with the first authors you studied, who wrote in perfect Arabic and only in Arabic, and wrote in a way that it could be from everywhere. So it's somehow you have to learn the imperial language and traditions to be accepted as an intellectual of the empire, or in our case the global empire, and then you can, yeah, then you gain citizenship as a good Roman, good Ottoman, good global Western scholar. And it's interesting, you probably without, well, maybe even with your special characters, if you were writing about in English about Apache Indians, or Apache Apaches, sorry for the Indian, Native American Apaches, that would be maybe less of a problem than to write about your own country, because I don't know, it's just, it's because then it becomes an international name for, and the badge of your publisher would be good enough. But yeah, so and one doesn't realize is that in order to discover history of your own country, how many additional languages you had to learn. It's not granted that you would have all the sources and all the languages necessary for the ventures. Yeah. So when did you get your position at Amsterdam?
Last September. So I'm pretty new here. It is really to celebrate, and in fact within Islamic studies and within our own field, the importance of other regions than the Arab world is to be highlighted, including the Balkans, of course. So it's also, I just had this idea that they don't refer to Sicily, for instance, the Bosnians as themselves, because Sicilian Islam, Southern Italian Islam was, or even was away from the conscience. Spanish was brought in for interesting reasons, but that other example is not, is hardly discussed. Yes, true.
Before we turn to do you have anything to add, because what you said was supremely interesting?
Oh, just the thing you've mentioned about like writing about one's own society versus writing about, let's say, some other culture or society. I guess like it's like this constant like insider outsider divide, which I mean I'm not fully kind of ascribing to it, because we're always insiders to something and outsiders to something, regardless like how close we are to the topic, or how close we are to the society, or how we belong to it, like in different ways in which we belong to it. But I would position that again to go back to the question of like who has the right to speak and produce knowledge and who doesn't. I would say that it's definitely a question of responsibility. But this like responsibility is, I would say, different for me than it would be for someone who is approaching it from a more distant way. Like my responsibility would probably be like whether I did justice to the people I'm working on. The responsibility of people who have more power would definitely be, I would say, even more enmeshed within the political circumstances of our own age. Because like if you're writing about Bosnia, it's like there are not too many books about Bosnia coming out. Like it's not like the most, as you said, like it's, you know, Islamic studies are kind of focused on certain areas, and the other areas are deemed a bit peripheral in that way. So if there is like so few books coming out about a certain region, then obviously the responsibility, especially of those who are in power, is much like larger, and it can have even like political repercussions. Like it can have all kinds of all sorts of things, which someone who is like working on a region such as, I mean, I don't want to simplify things, but if someone is working on a region which turns out like hundreds of books per year, like their responsibility is obviously not as great as someone who's working on a small region with like a small number of people, but people who are in a very, very precarious position. So like responsibility, like the key word I would say here, and responsibility goes for everyone, whether insider or outsider to a certain context.
Well, and one more thing, which is about Bosnia, that it looks a periphery from each side, and but it was one of the core lands of the Ottoman empires. I think it produced most of the viziers of the one of the most successful ethnicities when it comes to the elites of the Ottoman Empire was Bosnia. So it's not yeah, well, there are what is a periphery and what is not, and is a very it's much more complicated than it looks like. Well, like back to Sicily, which was the heart of the Mediterranean. You can, of course, you can still say that it is the heart of the Mediterranean. Bosnia can be seen, as other countries also, as the heart of the Balkans. And then the Balkans is an immensely interesting and important region for past, present, and future. So yes, our next Majlis will be different again in a different format. It will be our own PhD student Ismail al-Bahbahani, who is Kuwaiti. We'll have a discussion with Dalal al-Baroud, who had her PhD from SOAS, and they will discuss the rewilding of Arabia. So they will discuss both the genre of animal fables and also poetry, animals in poetry, and in literature in general, and then also Dalal has written such a book. So the revival of this symbolism as linked to Ismail's book on these animals, which was partly motivated by the idea of trying, as you said, culture has even today how important culture can be for politics. So he wrote on these animals in pre-Islamic poetry in order to try to save them physically out of extinction. So that will be our next week. Thank you to both of you, Michael, for the fantastic invitation, and Dženita for the fantastic talk and discussion after. And then I will close the recording, but we are here for further discussion and questions.
Thank you so much to all of you for a really kind invitation and for discussion, everything.